You know, it's a strange thing, isn't it, when you're entangled with someone who thrives on manipulation, someone who bends reality around their ego. It's not just a relationship, it's a battle for your soul. Narcissists feed on confusion, on making you doubt your own perception of reality, and before long, you don't even know if you're standing on solid ground anymore. But here's the remarkable thing. There are signs, subtle at first, that you're no longer caught in their psychological grip. Signs that the power dynamic is shifting, that the fortress they built around their fragile identity is beginning to crack, and that you, by reclaiming truth, boundaries, and dignity, are the one who's actually winning. When you reach the stage where your silence begins to unsettle the narcissist more than your words, it's a powerful turning point in the entire dynamic. Narcissists thrive on reaction. They are fueled by conflict, attention, and the constant assurance that they occupy a central place in your mind. Whether you argue with them, defend yourself, cry, or even plead, all of those actions feed their sense of significance. In their world, any reaction is evidence that they still control the emotional landscape. But silence is different. Silence denies them the very substance they crave, your energy, your participation in their drama. When you stop responding, something remarkable happens. The narcissist begins to realize that their strategies, criticism, insults, manipulations, no longer draw you into the cycle, and that unsettles them deeply. You see, narcissists rely on predictable patterns. They expect that if they push a button, you will give a familiar response. But when those buttons stop working, when their words echo into emptiness instead of sparking chaos, it forces them to confront their own lack of power. In that moment, the person they thought they could control begins to exist outside of their influence, and that shakes the very foundation of their fragile ego. Your silence does not mean weakness. It signals growth. It shows that you have detached enough to stop playing their game. You're no longer defending yourself against accusations that were never meant to be fair in the first place. You're no longer exhausting yourself trying to prove your worth to someone who was determined not to see it. Instead, you've chosen to preserve your energy, to step outside the endless loop of manipulation. This shift is often more devastating to a narcissist than anger ever could be, because anger still binds you to them, but silence is freedom. Silence also carries an implicit message. You don't need them to validate your existence anymore. For a narcissist who thrives on being the axis around which others revolve, this is intolerable. They sense that they are losing their grip, and that loss triggers their fear of irrelevance. They may lash out harder, escalate their attempts to provoke you, or switch tactics entirely. But beneath all that noise is a clear recognition. Their power over you is slipping. What's crucial to understand here is that your silence is not passive. It is an active, deliberate choice. It represents self-control, a refusal to be dragged back into toxic cycles. It is you reclaiming your voice by choosing when, how, and if you will use it. It's the recognition that you no longer owe your oppressor an explanation, that their approval or disapproval has no bearing on your identity. And in that quiet strength, something extraordinary takes root. You begin to experience peace. The noise that once filled your mind starts to fade. The constant tension, the need to monitor every reaction, begins to dissolve. Silence unsettles the narcissist because it confirms what they fear most, that you have broken free, that you no longer need them, and that the battle they thought they were winning has already been lost. When their attempts to provoke you no longer succeed, you've crossed another threshold. Reclaiming your strength, a narcissist thrives on reaction. It doesn't matter whether that reaction is anger, tears, frustration, or even desperate explanations. Every flare of emotion tells them they still occupy a place of influence in your psyche. Provocation is their weapon, and your reaction is their reward. But when you refuse to be baited, when their carefully constructed jabs fall flat, it signals that you've begun to master your own emotional responses, and that is something they cannot tolerate. Think about how they operate. They will insult you in subtle ways, disguise cruelty as humor, or deliberately bring up topics they know will hurt you. These actions aren't random. They are calculated tests, designed to measure whether you are still under their control. If you snap back, if you defend yourself, or if you try to make them understand your pain, you confirm their dominance. But when you don't give them the reaction they expect, the strategy collapses. The weapon they once used so easily becomes useless in their hands. The change doesn't happen overnight. At first, you may still feel the sting of their words, the heat rising inside when they press your buttons, but with awareness and practice, you learn to pause. You learn to see the provocation for what it is, an attempt to pull you into a game you no longer want to play, and in that pause, you choose differently. You don't shout, you don't beg, you don't justify. You let their words fall into silence, or you respond calmly, without the emotional charge they were fishing for. That moment is transformative. What unsettles the narcissist most is not just that you didn't react, but that you seemed unaffected. Indifference is poison to them. It tells them that their power over you is fading, that they no longer have the ability to shape your mood or dictate your self-image. They may intensify their tactics at first, throwing out harsher insults or escalating their behavior in an attempt to provoke something, anything, from you, but the more you remain unshaken, the clearer it becomes that their hold is slipping. On your side, something powerful begins to happen as well. You realize that you are no longer living at the mercy of someone else's moods or manipulations. You gain confidence in your ability to control your inner world. The narcissist may still shout, accuse, or mock, but it no longer penetrates your sense of self. Instead of spiraling into defense or despair, you stand steady. That steadiness becomes your shield. This is a sign of victory because it demonstrates true freedom. When someone can no longer provoke you, they can no longer control you. The drama they created becomes irrelevant to your peace of mind. Their attempts to trigger you only highlight their desperation, and you begin to see them not as an all-powerful manipulator, but as a fragile person grasping for control. That realization is liberating. And in that liberation, you discover the deepest truth. The narcissist only had the power you gave them. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding their control. The cycle ends, not because they decided to stop, but because you chose to rise above it. That's when you know the battle is already turning in your favor. When the narcissist begins to lose control of the narrative they built around you, it marks one of the clearest signs that their influence is crumbling. From the beginning, narcissists survive by shaping stories. They paint themselves as the hero, the victim, or the genius, while casting you as the villain, the fool, or the dependent one. This narrative is essential for them because it maintains their sense of superiority and control. They distort reality, twist facts, and rewrite events so that everything fits into a version of the story where they remain untouchable. As long as you accept their narrative, you remain trapped inside their world. But when you break free and begin to see reality as it is, not as they've constructed it, their power begins to collapse. For a long time, you may have played along with their story without realizing it. You might have doubted yourself, apologized for things you didn't do, or explained yourself endlessly, trying to prove you weren't what they claimed. That's exactly what they wanted. By keeping you on the defensive, they ensured you stayed locked into their script. But as your perspective changes, you stop participating. You recognize the lies for what they are, and more importantly, you stop allowing those lies to define who you are. That shift shakes the narcissist to their core because the story they've worked so hard to maintain suddenly begins to unravel. You might notice this first in small ways. When they accuse you of being selfish, instead of defending yourself, you calmly acknowledge your own truth and move on. When they insist you're overreacting, you don't fall into the trap of explaining your feelings. You know they're valid, with or without their acknowledgement. Each time you refuse to step back into their version of reality, you weaken the hold of their narrative. It's like pulling threads from a tapestry. Eventually, the entire fabric begins to fall apart. This loss of narrative control infuriates the narcissist. They will often double down, repeating old accusations louder, spreading their version of events to others, or trying to discredit you through gossip. But here's the crucial difference. You no longer bend under the weight of their distortions. The people around you may also begin to notice the cracks in their story, especially as your calm, consistent behavior contrasts with the chaos they try to create. Over time, their narrative loses credibility, not just with you, but with others as well. For you, this stage is deeply liberating. No longer defined by their false story, you reclaim your identity. You remember who you are outside of their manipulations. Instead of being the character they wrote for you, you step into your own truth. And as you live out that truth confidently, their version of events becomes less and less believable. What once held you hostage now looks more like a desperate performance. The real victory here is psychological. When you stop living inside their narrative, you realize that you were never as powerless as they made you believe. The story they spun was never the truth. It was just a tool of control. And now, with that tool broken, you see them not as an author of your fate, but as a person whose lies can no longer shape your life. That's when you know you've won a battle far greater than any argument. You've reclaimed reality itself. ChatGPT said, when your boundaries stop being negotiable, you've reached one of the strongest indicators that the narcissist is losing their grip on you. Boundaries are the lines that define what is acceptable and what is not in your relationships. But with a narcissist, those lines are constantly under attack. They push, they test, they guilt, trip, and they manipulate in order to blur or erase them. For as long as you allowed your boundaries to bend, they felt secure in their control. But when you begin to enforce those limits firmly, without apology or compromise, the dynamic shifts dramatically. At the start, boundaries with a narcissist often feel impossible to maintain. You might say no, only to be met with anger, ridicule, or endless persuasion until you finally give in. They may shame you for being selfish or accuse you of being cold when you try to protect your own needs. Over time, this wears down your sense of authority, and you may begin to believe you don't have the right to stand firm. That's exactly what they want, to make you feel that your limits are unreasonable so they can continue taking without restraint. But as you grow stronger, you realize that boundaries are not just external rules. They're a reflection of your self-respect. You stop negotiating whether your no is valid. You stop explaining yourself to someone who is never listening in good faith. You recognize that you don't need to justify the need for rest, privacy, or independence. And in that realization, your boundaries become non-negotiable. This change is not about aggression or cruelty. It's about clarity and consistency. You mean what you say, and you follow through. For the narcissist, this is deeply unsettling. They are used to being able to wear you down with persistence. They expect that if they push hard enough, you will eventually cave. But when you don't, when your no stays a no, they are forced to confront a reality they despise. They no longer control you. They may lash out, accuse you of being heartless, or try to punish you with silence and withdrawal. Yet none of these tactics work if you remain steady, and the more they realize they can't cross those lines, the more powerless they feel. Enforcing boundaries also has another powerful effect. It begins to restore your sense of safety. Where once you felt constantly invaded or disregarded, now you feel a growing confidence that you can protect your own space. That feeling of safety is crucial, because it gives you the strength to resist further manipulation. Each time you uphold a boundary, you reinforce your own worth. You prove to yourself that your needs matter, regardless of how the narcissist tries to devalue them. Ultimately, boundaries are about reclaiming your freedom. When they stop being negotiable, you stop being a participant in the narcissist's game. You no longer feel guilty for protecting yourself, and you no longer allow their disapproval to dictate your choices. And while the narcissist may rage against these limits, their inability to break them is the clearest sign that their control is dissolving. Your life is no longer theirs to invade. It is yours to protect, nurture, and live fully. That is real victory. When their need for validation collides with your indifference, you reach a turning point that exposes the narcissist's deepest weakness. Narcissists are fueled by attention, admiration, and emotional reactions. They need to feel seen, praised, or even feared in order to maintain their inflated sense of self. Every compliment, every argument, every sign that you're emotionally invested in them acts as food for their ego. But when you begin to detach emotionally, when their attempts to impress you, shock you, or wound you are met with indifference, it cuts directly at the core of their survival mechanism. This is not just about ignoring them, it's about genuinely no longer needing their approval. In the past, you may have bent over backwards to please them, chasing their praise or dreading their disapproval. They may have trained you to crave those fleeting moments of validation, the rare compliment, the temporary affection, the occasional acknowledgement. Those breadcrumbs of approval kept you tied to them, always hoping for more, but once you recognize the pattern and stop valuing their validation, the cycle begins to break. Indifference is a language narcissists cannot understand. They thrive on intensity, whether positive or negative, but they cannot tolerate being irrelevant. When you stop reacting to their criticism with hurt or to their praise with desperation, you strip them of control. You are no longer dancing to their rhythm. Their praise feels hollow, their insults fail to sting, and their manipulative gestures fall flat. This is a devastating realization for them because it means their ability to regulate their ego through you is gone. At first, this shift often provokes them to escalate. They may become louder, more dramatic, or more desperate in their attempts to recapture your attention. They might boast excessively, try to guilt trip you, or even swing between love, bombing, and cruelty just to see what will break your indifference. But every time you remain calm and detached, their frustration grows. They begin to feel the emptiness of their own validation, seeking behavior, because without your participation, their efforts yield nothing. For you, indifference is not born of bitterness, it's born of strength. It means you've reached a place where their opinion no longer defines your sense of self. You know your worth without needing them to confirm it. Their approval or disapproval carries no weight because you've built a foundation of self-respect that doesn't depend on their shifting moods. That inner stability is what protects you from being pulled back into their cycle. What's powerful about this stage is that it transforms the entire relationship dynamic. Where once you were vulnerable to their manipulation, now you hold the upper hand, not because you fight harder, but because you've stopped playing the game. Their hunger for validation crashes against the wall of your indifference, and in that collision, their power disintegrates. They realize, whether they admit it or not, that you no longer exist as their emotional supply. In the end, this indifference is freedom. It frees you from their constant demands, from their endless tests, from the exhausting effort of trying to win approval that was always conditional. And it forces the narcissist to confront the reality they fear most. They no longer matter in the way they once did. That recognition is not only their loss, it is your victory. When you finally begin to feel peace where chaos once lived, it is perhaps the most profound sign that you have truly won against the narcissist. Life with a narcissist is never stable. It is a constant cycle of highs and lows, arguments that erupt out of nowhere, criticisms that keep you second, guessing yourself, manipulations that leave you drained. Even in moments of calm, you're often waiting for the next storm, walking on eggshells, anticipating the next explosion. That tension becomes so normal that you almost forget what peace feels like. But when the narcissist no longer controls you, that inner storm begins to quiet, and the peace that returns is both unfamiliar and powerful. Peace in this context doesn't mean that the narcissist disappears from your life completely, though sometimes that is the case. It means that inside yourself, you stop being pulled into the chaos they create. Their words, their moods, their accusations, they no longer occupy your mind the way they used to. You are no longer lying awake at night replaying arguments in your head, no longer consumed with trying to understand or fix them, no longer feeling responsible for their unhappiness. Instead, you begin to notice something new: silence that doesn't feel threatening, space that feels safe, and time that feels like your own again. This peace is not accidental. It is the result of the boundaries you've set, the detachment you've cultivated, and the inner strength you've built. You have stopped feeding into their endless need for drama, and as a result, the drama loses its grip on you. The narcissist may still attempt to stir chaos, but you find that it doesn't penetrate the way it once did. Where their manipulation once triggered panic, it now triggers clarity. Where their insults once wounded you, they now sound hollow, and in that shift, your nervous system begins to calm. The most powerful part of this peace is the freedom it gives you to reconnect with yourself. When you're no longer consumed by someone else's chaos, you rediscover your own voice, your own desires, your own values. You have the mental and emotional space to pursue the things that bring you joy, rather than constantly managing someone else's volatility. You find yourself laughing more, resting more deeply, and living without the constant dread of conflict. That sense of peace is not just relief, it is evidence that the narcissist no longer has the power to control your inner world. For the narcissist, this peace is unsettling because it shows them that the chaos they thrived on has lost its effect. They may try harder to provoke you, to pull you back into the storm, but your calm becomes their frustration. No matter how much noise they make, it no longer shakes your foundation. And that is the ultimate proof of victory, not just surviving the chaos, but rising above it so completely that it no longer touches you. In the end, peace is the reward for every step you've taken to break free. It is the opposite of the confusion and turmoil they imposed on you. It is the life they told you you'd never have without them. Yet now you are living it, stronger, freer, and more whole than before. That peace is not just a sign that you've won. It is the very essence of winning.